Hi everyone, good Friday afternoon. Welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my first guest in, Luis Vargas. Thanks for coming back to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
We've been here before, we've talked all things politics, and definitely want to pick your brain, throwing your hat back in the election ring.
Absolutely.
Running for state rep once again. I'm going to pick your brain on Rhode Island election politics shortly, but I want to start a little national because in the news this week, the revelation that the 2020 census from the Trump administration looks to include a citizenship question on that census. Now, there's been quite a discussion here in Rhode Island. GoLocal did poll all the gubernatorial candidates as to their thoughts on the matter. It varied amongst the Republicans. What's your sense? Because we know here in Rhode Island that population is an issue as it pertains to holding on to a congressional seat. But then there are those, Patricia Morgan came out and said very strongly, look, this question should certainly be on there. What are your thoughts on it?
Sure, so I think it's a very interesting question, no pun intended. Actually, I think when you look at the primary, people are going to be jockeying for position to who's the most conservative, who's the least conservative. So it is a little tricky in the Rhode Island primary. That said, I think, when you're looking at any sort of public policy, you have to look at not only if it's right on paper, but what it will be an impact. So I think the citizenship question, especially with Rhode Island in danger of losing a congressional seat, you want to count as many people as possible. So I think, in a selfish way, Rhode Island wants to keep that question away. As for the primary, I can't really blame Patricia Morgan for wanting to take that position.
Well, she sounded, I didn't know if the response had come from Patricia or Joe Trillo, because it sounded, as we know, Joe Trillo now running as an independent, the former Trump campaign chair, but as you said, it is primary politics. But again, going to Rhode Island as a whole, again, we're looking at that numbers games. Are you surprised that we did not hear comment from Mayor Fung on this, or is that being between the rock and the hard place?
So I would be surprised if this was the first time, but being that this is not the first time he's ducked a question, I would say I'm not surprised. Unfortunately, I think, Fung had a prime opportunity in this campaign to really be that, change agent, being that he had run before. Great things have happened in Cranston since, but it seems like, he's just, sort of duck and cover as of right now, which is unfortunate.
So, I mean, between that rock and the hard place, I mean, do you think he probably has consternation about those population numbers and just, but it's an election year. I'm sure it's going to come, I'm pretty sure it's going to come up in a debate. I wouldn't say I'm sure.
No, it will, and I think he should have taken this opportunity to hone what his answer is going to be, to really look at the policy and its impact. And, as governor, he's going to have to address these issues. And, as a governor, you want the most strong congressional representation that you can possibly have to help your state. So.
That is true, and being a mayor of one of the largest cities in Rhode Island, I mean, he knows all the leadership. He works across. He has to work across the aisle to try to. So clearly, he's clearly aware of this. It's interesting. Rhode Island joined other states in suing to stop this question. You're in law school right now. Are you to 2L yet?
I'm a second semester of 1L, so not quite. But,
so you can give us the legal, your legal
no,
opinion?
I cannot. In case any of my law school professors are watching. No, it's really interesting because it brings up sort of state rights and federal rights, and it goes again to looking at a policy and how it's going to impact people. So I can't say I'm surprised that Rhode Island, the Attorney General, is advocating for his state. But being that I'm just in 1L, I'm just going to sit back and watch and see how this turns out.
So there's legislation introduced this week by Carlos Tabone to provide economic incentives to try to get middle-class people to move here and to pay them $833 a month to the maximum of $10,000 a year. Your thoughts on the approach?
The way I see it, it is transparently trying to buy a congressional seat. At the end of the day, it's corporate welfare for individuals. It's unfortunate. I think that a state legislature says we can't make our state so great that people want to come here, so let's pay them to come here. I think that's unfortunate, unnecessary, and terrible public policy.
Well, we'll see if that ends up getting traction. It certainly got a lot of attention this week. Something that's gotten some attention in recent weeks and months is a story that GoLocal had reported on. This pertains to the America's Future Foundation. Now, this is an organization of conservative-leaning small government individuals looking forward. Tends to be a lot of Republicans, and there was the issue that they were looking to hold the event at a brewery, and the brewer got wind by someone who had posted something equating the group to the KKK. You intervened in this, did you not?
I did. So I'm actually a board member of America's Future Foundation. And being that I'm of Puerto Rican descent, it was very interesting to me to have somebody accusing us of being affiliated with the KKK. So what happened was basically an internet troll, an anonymous internet troll, posted on Instagram that Revival Brewery was hosting an event that was supportive of the KKK. Now, naturally, you would think they would reach out to us and say, hey, what's going on? But that was not done. Instead, one of the owners took that Instagram post to heart and immediately said, this event is not happening, this event is canceled, we do not support white supremacy. So like you said, I did intervene. I said, it's really interesting because we don't support white supremacy either. This is what our group's about. We're a group of young, liberty-minded people who just want to get together and get to know each other and support local businesses like Revival Brewery. So, it was unfortunate. We ended up having the event anyway at another local establishment. So the event went well, but it really goes to show how intense politics can be nowadays.
That is, to say the least, the very least. And talk with us a little bit about your thoughts. March for Our Lives last weekend here in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the gun debate continues to take place following the recent shooting in Florida. Talk with us a little bit about your thoughts on the state's role, again, running for state rep, looking at where things stand policy-wise and proposal-wise as it pertains to guns.
Sure. So I think that the March for Our Lives was important. I think that young people getting involved in politics for better, whether you agree with the policy or not, I think it's extremely important for young people to have a voice, to feel they have a voice in our government, because a lot of people feel like they're sort of taken for granted. So I think it's great that it happened. As far as the specific policies in the state, I do think it's important to look at things like age restrictions. I mean, we already understand that a person's brain doesn't develop necessarily fully until they're at age 25. So I think some reasonable restrictions can be put in place in regards to firearm purchases, especially when a firearm can be used in self-defense and potentially be fatal.
So as you're going around, as you're looking towards running again this year for state rep, what are the conversations you're having with folks in your district as you're eyeing a seat once again?
Sure. So I get my haircut done down the street. I go to the corner store whenever possible, and when I talk to people, they're upset. And it's unfortunate. They're upset about speed cameras. They're upset about transparency in state government. But really, lately it's been the speed cameras.
It's been a little issue. And I'd love to have you put your legal hat on again, but as you said, you're only a second semester 1L. Sure. We do know there is a legal challenge, and we'll have to wait and see if that gets upheld. But it's how they're implemented and how they're...
Exactly. So like we were mentioning earlier, you look at the impact that a policy has, and especially in my neighborhood, the south side of Providence, people are getting 3 or 4 fines before they even know that there's this camera on the corner. Most of the city, $100 fine is, that's the difference between getting a full, weeks of groceries, yep, or having to really sacrifice. And you get 3 or 4, you're talking about $400. That's more than a lot of people make in a week in Providence. So, this is really impacting families, and I hope that, the city will take a real look at this program and decide if it's really necessary.
Well, it clearly was a huge revenue generator from the first rollout of it. Now we've seen the pause because there has been a class action lawsuit that GoLocal was first to report pertaining to it, and an injunction as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the speed cameras moving forward, because the city claims it had told the citizens of this. There, I believe, was one press release.
Yeah.
But something that I saw you applaud the mayor on was his stepping back on the plastic bag ban. Talk with us about that.
Yeah. So as we the theme for today is impacts of public policy, and a plastic bag ban, while absolutely noble in its intentions, I think the use of plastic bags worldwide and the danger to the environment that it's posing is very important. I just think that, imposing a fee on people who want to use a plastic bag at the store, especially for one city, in one state, in one country, isn't really going to make an impact. It's interesting, I've been having this discussion with a lot of people lately, and when it comes to a fee, right? either the fee is going to stop them from using the plastic bag, in which case, why not just ban it? And if it's not going to stop them from using the plastic bag, then what's the point? That's the way I see it. So, I think I'm glad that the mayor, took that stand and said, we're going to look at the impact of this policy before we actually start doing it. And, hopefully they decide against it, because I think it needs to, if it's going to be done, it should be done state level, even really at the congressional level.
So at the local level, at the state rep level, we talked about speed cameras, although that's a city one, but it's the constituents of whom you're dealing with. We talked a little bit about gun policy. Let's go statewide with the governor's race. And as we started talking about the census question and the issues that are really going to define the race. The governor comes out, just says that there were some additional jobs this month. This is after a number of months with job losses.
Right.
Is the economy the top question for the gubernatorial campaign?
I think it's actually not going to be, and the reason I say that is because we're at a very low unemployment rate. We haven't fully recovered yet from the recession, but things are going decently well, all things considered.
So if economy's in the number 2 spot, what's in the number 1?
I gotta be honest with you. I think it's transparency in government. I think it's our state government can't get things like UHIP done right. When our most needy can't get the food stamps that they need to be able to provide food for their family, I think that's going to be the biggest issue in my mind statewide. Protecting the vulnerable is, an extremely important statewide policy to look at.
And how interesting do you think this race is shaping up to be? Gubernatorial primary, we have one on the Democratic side, several independent candidates, several. Do we need runoff legislation?
So we have about, I think it's 14, correct me if I'm wrong, it could be 14 candidates for governor now. So it's going to be very interesting. Last time we had a 3-way race between moderate, Republican, and Democrat. Now we could have a moderate, Democrat, Republican, 6 independents, Joe Trillo, Matt Brown. That said, as for runoff legislation, runoffs deal with one part of the problem where it's perceived that there's not a mandate when somebody wins. But realistically, voter participation is the problem.
Yeah.
Less than half of the state is voting in our statewide elections. So when you say this person doesn't have a mandate if they don't get 50% of the vote, they're really getting 50% of about 25% of the state.
Population.
So, I think the big thing is just letting people know there's an election going on, inspiring people to go out and vote, and not these sort of Band-Aid policies.
So speaking of policies, can we expect to be hearing from the Vargas campaign in the coming weeks and months? How are you balancing school and running for office, by the way?
It's been interesting. So I'm in school, pretty much all day, and then I get home, kiss my wife, and then immediately go and talk to people in my neighborhood to convince them that we need new state leadership. And the issues that I'm going to be focusing on are just transparency in government, having a monthly community meeting, where I can let the community know what's going on at the State House, because they shouldn't have to worry about these issues coming down the pipeline like speed cameras. There should be a state delegation that's united in Providence. We don't have that right now, and it hurts our city. I think it hurts our city in the State House, so hopefully I can change that.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in here and pick your brain on some hot button issues as well as some of your campaign goals. Luis Vargas, I'm sure we will talk in the coming weeks. Thanks so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Let you go back to studying.
Absolutely.
Okay. Luis Vargas, law student and running for state rep, again wanted to talk about some hot button issues here in Rhode Island and nationally. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for this 4 o'clock news and politics show. Just had Luis Vargas, a former state rep, a former candidate for state rep, Freudian slip, running for state rep, talking with him about some hot button issues. We'll have some hot button issues to talk about with Bob Whitcomb, GoLocal columnist. Appreciate your taking the time to come in to the studio
getting
here.
Ready for Easter weekend.
Do you have the eggs all hidden?
Yeah, absolutely. The Fabergé eggs are very
I'm coming to your house.
Right.
A Fabergé egg or two.
Eggs Benedict Arnold.
Well, before we get into the Easter holiday, we've got lots to talk about here in the studio. One of the ones I want to talk with you about is the FTC's announcement this week that it's investigating Facebook. We've been here before with the FTC in 2011.
Time ago. I think the big problem with Facebook and all this, they got to be broken up for starters. They're far too big. They probably have more power in many ways than the great trust, the turn of the last century that Theodore Roosevelt tried to break up, the Standard Oil Trust, and they're totally unregulated. And in a lot of ways, they could do more damage than Standard Oil did. At least you could go buy oil from them, and gasoline, and it was fairly straightforward. These people with their control of so much communication, their ability to drain revenue from other places, such as old-fashioned media, of course, is troubling. And I think they have been, they've had very, very loose oversight. Not just Facebook, the other ones too, Yahoo and so on, but Facebook.
But they've been
particularly egregious.
FTC slapped them in 2011, and I believe
nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
It was a joke, yeah.
I believe part of that announcement this week was a recognition of the fact that maybe perhaps Facebook didn't adhere to all they were supposed to as of 2011.
But the big problem with all this stuff is basically the business model for making billions and billions of dollars depends upon the use and misuse of private data. So the question is, how do they move away from that business model and make billions and billions of dollars? I think Zuckerberg's got a fortune, what is it, 60 billion or something ridiculous like that. So they want to be seen as responsible. They don't want to be broken up. At the same time, they want to continue to take in billions a year. So how does this, I don't know if you can square this circle.
Have you seen folks on Facebook saying, that's it, I'm getting off?
I've seen a few, but most people are going to stick with it until they themselves get sort of raped on Facebook because it's so easy. Because when they came up with this format, it was brilliant in its ease of use, its ability to quickly put links in, its use as a communications media, the messenger, the Facebook Messenger thing, very important. The picture quality is pretty good, not great, but pretty good. It is so easy that in my experience, Americans especially will take convenience about just about everything, whether it's fast food or Facebook.
Convenience trumps all.
And I know the Russians have been manipulating it and all that, but I don't think that's really sunk into most Americans yet. They knew something is wrong, but still they're in there putting pictures of their pet, flamingos.
Pet flamingos.
They're duck-billed platypuses and so on.
Okay. Pink Flamingos, John Waters.
Yeah, that's right. One of the great movies of all time.
A few scenes in there
Truly
too.
disgusting.
Speaking of Trump, let's talk a little bit about the Trump administration's proposal to have a citizenship question on the 2020 census.
Yeah, I'm a little torn about that because it seems like a perfectly good question to ask, and they used to ask it even though it has not been, it wasn't on the census in 2010. Before then, for a long time, it was a voluntary question.
But it's been on there before.
It's been there before. I'm now kind of leaning against asking that question because I think it'll dangerously reduce the amount of data, population data we need, demographic stuff.
That's clearly the fear here in Rhode Island.
I think that's the fear here in Rhode Island. Certainly California, they're terrified more than Rhode Island. But it'd be not only Rhode Island, New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, sort of urban states, a lot of Hispanics. Much less so in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So I think that would be bad if we cut off, we discourage that data. We need as much information as we can about who's living in the United States, with or without a passport.
So I'll tell you, it was interesting this week when the information that came out, Rhode Island said it was going to sue along with other states.
California doing it, I think.
Yes, about 12 states and Rhode Island's hopping in. I reached out to all of the gubernatorial candidates, especially from the Republican side, was curious as to what we were going to hear.
They didn't want to hear that question.
Patricia Morgan was gung-ho, said
she was,
all for it. Mayor Fung, crickets.
Yeah.
So you've got to wonder how, is that a big issue for the GOP primary?
He himself, the son of immigrants. So, yeah.
So, is it going to be? We'll see.
Well,
I mean, clearly, she's clearly hedging on going right. He might be that more
he's
moderate.
on the right side, and Mayor Fung is sort of in the middle. He's basically a centrist by personality and belief. I think, again, the thing, it's not an ideological thing to me. It's a practical thing. We need as much information as we can about who's living here, in my view. We need it for distribution of federal funds. We need it for business needs it, because business, of course, uses U.S. Census data. I mean, that's a huge source. And if we have a gigantic undercount, say 1 million people in California too terrified to fill out a census form at all, that would not be good. It would be, I suppose, it'd be good for the National Republican Party, because maybe then California would lose a legislative seat.
Speaking of
congressional seat.
Filling out forms, I know you saw on GoLocal this week with the Ethics Commission.
Yeah, right. I couldn't understand why there's such pushback against the simple idea of putting that stuff online. I think it would cost maybe a few $1,000, I don't know, $2,000 max to put online, instead of having to come downtown to this town, this burg, and get paper, which could be the afternoon, the way traffic and everything is.
Well, I
don't understand why this is so difficult to do.
It is done via email, but one of the things that GoLocal had uncovered was, when we were looking for the Coventry town manager's file, the fact they couldn't find it, had no...
Yeah.
You can go online, get Board of Elections, get campaign finance reports all the time. I mean, there's plenty of things that are digitized online, and you saw that the
PDF, usually in a PDF form.
The speaker is going to push for legislation next week to make sure that this is
I think probably
online.
GoLocal lit a fuse on that one.
Might have.
In fact, I just don't understand why it wasn't done a long time ago. It can't be cost, because that's insignificant.
Well, hopefully we'll see what happens moving forward, but again, I would just say lighting the fuse. So I've got, what's in your cheat sheet?
Well, let me see. Well, I talk about Facebook and all that stuff. I talk about one thing that caught my eye. There's a guy, it was Vincent Bono. He wants to start a passenger rail service in certain parts of northern Massachusetts going up into New Hampshire, which gave me the perennial reminder, we really do need a train that goes from Providence to Newport. Newport is such a draw. People could come to Providence and take the train, a pretty route down probably East Bay, and go to Newport. It would just be fabulous. I thought of this because I ran into, everything's connected. It's all one big story. There's a proposal to extend the trains from Brunswick, Maine, college town, as you know, up to Rockland, Maine, which is a big art and fishing and tourist center. On Penobscot Bay, very popular in the summer. Lots of tourists from the U.S. and Canada, and the plan is within a year to extend summertime service to there, to Rockland. So why can't we do? I know you would have to get a new right of way and blah blah blah. But this would be a tremendous boon, I think, to the state.
It's funny, we went from rail to bike paths. Now we might want to go from bike
paths
to rail.
I'd much rather, bike paths are great. They're to be lauded and all that stuff. But I think it would be much better for the environment and for the economy of the state if there were a train service. And it used to be, many moons ago, you could take a train from Providence to Newport.
I'll tell you, the ferry is wildly popular in the summertime. There's only
but
a few routes.
that's only a small number of people.
That's a small, exactly.
Very small number of people.
I think that might be your campaign platform.
Yeah, I think so, trains. But it just makes so much sense, because Newport is internationally known, so you get a lot of tourists, go to the airport here, go up to Providence, may take the train to Providence, then go down. I realize we're talking about, I'll be dead when it's finished. That's something that could take 8 to 10 years, but this would be such an economic development boon.
We have that
cut
straight
down
shot.
on traffic, on the bridges. It's just it would be a triumph.
So he's going to be writing about trains to Newport on Sunday. What else will you be
and let's see,
your
what else?
opinion
Yeah,
on?
I give a couple of things that I hope maybe GoLocal look into. There's a big scandal in Massachusetts about overtime, state police overtime. It's my view that state overtime abuse by law enforcement and by firefighters is pretty much institutionalized almost everywhere, or in many places, especially in urban states. And I think that what's going on in Massachusetts can be.
So do you think the
mirrored
findings in
elsewhere.
Mass, do you think that's going to affect change up there?
Yeah, I think it will. Yeah, if you believe Charlie Baker, and he could be fairly quietly fierce. So. Yeah.
He is what, the most popular governor in?
Yeah, here you go. Right, most popular Republican in one of the 2 or 3 most Democratic states. But he's brilliant at getting along with the legislature controlled by the other party, and he doesn't get mad. Doesn't get mad. Very smart guy. But I think this ought to be. We should read what's happening in Massachusetts and apply it to what's going on in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and so on. Because my experience, I remember years ago we used to hear about this when I worked in Boston. And around here over time. It's sort of in the same, it's a first cousin of people retiring at the age of 38.
It happens.
With a full pension.
It happens. Well, we'll look forward to reading that this weekend.
Okay.
Any big Easter plans?
Yeah, we're going to go to Newport, of all things. Unfortunately, not by train. I think I'll hitch, maybe, then meet new people. The plan is to go to Newport, and there's a kind of resort place there called the Ocean Cliff House. So I think we're going to go there.
Lovely. Well, I wish everyone a great holiday weekend.
Thank you very
Whatever
much.
you're celebrating, and look forward to having you in the studio again next week.
Very good.
Bob Wickham, I'll let
Thanks,
you
pal.
go around the corner.
Okay.
See you later, pal. Bob Wickham followed up after Luis Vargas, former state rep candidate, running again this year, talking a lot of politics and news at the 4 o'clock hour. But it has been a full day here at GoLocal, between kicking off in the Alex and Ani Lounge at 2 o'clock with the Billy Harpin Band. If you didn't catch it, you must. These kids are on the rise, and Molly O'Brien was up at 3. 4 o'clock news and politics. We'll be back on Monday after the weekend with Josh Fenton on Business Monday, Molly O'Brien, all things lifestyle. So take care, stay tuned, make sure to read GoLocalProv.com over the weekend. Catch us on Facebook. We look forward to seeing you next week. We appreciate your watching. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.